Okay, so today we're gonna be looking at answering this question right here. Okay, what is chivalry and why do we need it? While you're watching this video, make sure you are taking notes because this is stuff that will be covered in our tests and quizzes coming up. Okay, so you got to make sure you know and understand this information. Also, papers will be getting passed back to you. I got those in the grade book this morning. If it is past 11:10, which is right now, then I do not have them in the grade book yet. Okay, so if you got it done, just turn it back in if it's not in the grade book or something along those lines. Okay. But let's address this question. Okay, first things first, make sure you pause this if you need to, okay, to make sure you get all this stuff written down. Okay, but knights originally didn't have a code of conduct, and that's because they didn't necessarily think they needed one. Okay, but once knights started to abuse their power and try and attack other knights in other manners to try and gain more political power and more wealth for themselves, the Catholic Church and the kings and lords quickly realized that they needed to try and get the behavior of the knights under control. And so using the justification of religion, they decided, hey, knights, you guys can't just run the countryside and kill and murder other people in other manners that don't belong to you just so that you can get more power and more wealth for yourself. Okay, that's not okay. That's not fair. And since you are a Christian, you should follow these general principles that say, hey, you shouldn't kill people. Okay, so that's why the church stepped in and developed. So all this stuff right here on this slide explains exactly why they implemented chivalry. Okay, because the knights needed it. They weren't behaving very well themselves. So they created chivalry, which is basically they had to follow these basic characteristics. And these three up here on top were more political. Okay, they had to be courageous, which basically meant they had to go fight in battles. They had to be loyal. They had to make sure that they were following the rules that their king and their lords had set out and created for them. And they had to be loyal to the church. Okay, that was a new component of this code of chivalry. Okay, now not only are you politically tied to a king and their lord, you are now also tied directly to the church, and you have some obligations to the church. And then duty, everything that they ask of you in protection, grace, and sacrifice, and managing your fief, which is the piece of ground that you have been given in feudalism, you need to fulfill all of those different feudal obligations. And if you don't, if you're not being loyal, you're not being courageous, you're not providing protection for the weak and the innocent, you're not being graceful in your actions, meaning you're not being a nice, kind, courteous knight, then you could potentially lose your knightship, you could potentially lose your fief and lose all of your land and belongings. So chivalry was created and developed by the church in conjunction with kings and lords to try and curb the negative behavior that knights ultimately had on the medieval society. Okay. Um, then we have some siege tactics. Okay. So the purpose of these, well, they were trying to invade and conquer new territories, and they needed ways to try and take down castles. And so these are the ways that they tried to take down castles. Okay. Number one, they had a battering ram. Basically, pretty simple. They had ropes attached to this giant log with a ram on the end, and they would use momentum to swing this thing back and forth and slam it into walls in an effort to try and knock down castle walls, knock down drawbridges in an attempt to try and get inside of the castle walls. Okay. Next thing, excuse the video. They had a mangonel, which basically, long story short, it uses tension by attaching a rope to this pulley system and attaching a rope to this arm. They crank it, which tightens up the rope around the arms, you can see right here. And then as it got tighter and tighter and tighter, you would pull a release mechanism, which was this pin right here. Once this pin was pulled, the tension created right here on this log would fling it forward. It would hit this right here and it would launch this projectile. Okay. So they use that to try and knock down castle walls. They also use trebuchets to knock down castle walls. Basically, trebuchet is pretty simple. Without getting too sciencey, a trebuchet uses momentum to launch large objects, and momentum that you use, they would usually have a counterbalance weight right here, which could look many different ways. They oftentimes didn't necessarily look like this. They'd use a counterbalance weight here, and they would fill it up with rocks. And similarly to the mangonel, they would use a rope and a pulley to tighten this up and swing this arm from this position down to this position, and then use a pin release mechanism right here that would ultimately launch this object forward. Okay, if you go and watch the video, you can find this on my slides on Canvas. Okay, you can go watch any one of these videos.
In the
Then lastly, the javelin, okay, or the ballista, excuse me. A ballista launches an arrow, which is they call a javelin. It was just a larger version of a javelin. You can think of these kind of just as modern day crossbows. Okay, there's really large crossbows. They function the exact same way. You use this crank to pull back these two limbs, which are attached with ropes. And as you pull that back, your arrow slowly slides back until it's tightened all the way. And then again, you use another release mechanism with a pin right here to release this, and then it launches the javelin forward. They could launch these things 200 meters away, and they were primarily used to attack archers on tops of the curtain walls. Okay, then lastly, or second to last, we have siege towers. Siege towers were a very important component of medieval warfare because you could wheel these puppies right up to the side of a curtain wall, and you could launch your army across the curtain wall. Okay, so they were used to try and get up and over. Inside here, they would have either ladders or stairs that ran upward towards the top of the wall, and they designed them to be able to get over many different sizes of wall. So that way, these ones keep going up higher, and so on and so forth. Okay, so then undermining, this was a very uncommon tactic, but if you had a long time to try and invade a place, you could dig a tunnel underneath of there in an effort to try and collapse a big castle wall, or trying to gain a tunnel that would actually lead you into typically the bailey of the inside the curtain wall. Okay, so lastly, you'll need to read page 612, and on your own, you'll just think about these questions. What's the organizational structure of the church? How does this conflict display the power of the church, and how does the cathedral, the Notre Dame Cathedral display the wealth of the Catholic Church? Okay, so lastly, and I want to add something here too, really fast. This is the structure of the Catholic Church, okay? So in the Pope is the leader, we've discussed that already, we should know that, but then the clergy were the religious leaders that were beneath the Catholic Church. And in the clergy, we have two major categories. Those are the bishops. The bishops are leaders of several churches. And the priests are leaders of individual churches. Okay. We'll be getting into the church, how this structure with the clergy ultimately leads to the Crusades here in a little bit. You'll learn about that in another video on Thursday. So with all that being said, make sure that you go in, take all the notes that you need, pause it whenever you need to. But again, I go through this fairly quick, so that way you can watch it and then go back and maybe take the notes that you need to know. All right. Have a good day, you guys. I'll see you on Wednesday.